Ken really needs no introduction, but Ken Cukier is the Deputy Executive Editor at The Economist. He is the co-author of the New York Times best-selling book, Big Data, that I'm sure many of you have read, given that it was a bestseller back 2013. It has since been translated into 20 languages around the world. Previously, Ken was the technology editor at the Wall Street Journal Asia in Hong Kong and worked at the International Herald Tribune in Paris. In 2002 to 2004, he was a research fellow at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. Ken is a board director at Chatham House, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and an associate fellow at the University of Oxford's Said's Business School. His latest book, which is on your tables and on your chairs, Framers, is on mental models and AI. And I know Ken describes himself as always curious. And we're so honoured and privileged to have you here today, Ken. Please give him a very warm round of applause. Welcome, Ken. Thank you.
Thank you, Anya. Hey. Thank you very much, Anya. What an incredible day this has been. I mean, so far, it's just been eye-opening, one after the other. I am so curious. I'm always curious. I also love data. I love data so much that everywhere I go, I have to collect a little bit more of it. So here we go. This is not a Slido. Put your phones down. You got to pay attention. I need a show of hands. Got to be honest. Who here thinks that AI is going to lead to a job apocalypse, eradicating the landscape of employment? Raise your hand. Who here doesn't think it's going to lead to a job apocalypse? Raise your hand. Okay, fine. So you're raising your hand. Who here doesn't know? Raise your hand. Yeah, there's a couple wise people here. Very good. I think there's good to know there's some people who are going to raise the level. I don't know either. I don't think it will, for the reasons that I think that, that those of you all raise your hand don't think it will as well. I mean, we've got a sunny temperament. We also think that maybe we're going to have ingenuity to get us through this. But it's not quite clear what is going to happen. But what we do know is that there's something very special about human beings, and there's really something special about AI as well, and maybe together we can actually advance society. But to understand what's so important about human beings, it's useful to remember that, in fact, at all times, what we're seeing in the world is only a part of it. That we think that we're in one environment when, in fact, it's different. That we frame things in a certain way, leading our lives, while other things are happening at the same time. So at this point, I have to step forward and ask the question, try to answer it, what can humans do, and what can AI do? But I need your help. Because I don't know what the best questions to ask are, and we've heard a lot of really interesting things on stage, and I can actually shape my remarks based on your interests. So, let me now ask you, shout out, what question would you like answered? Anyone? What question would you like answered? You, if you have a question. You don't? Okay, that's fine, totally fine. I wouldn't either if I was being called on by some weird conference speaker.
Where's the best place to go on holidays in 2023?
Where is the best place to go on holidays in 2023? Well, I would say Dublin, of course, but I'm not from here. Okay, we'll hold that question. I think we'll get to that. Any other question? Come on, as tough as it can be, epistemology, religion, the meaning of life.
Will it be possible to cure cancer potentially?
Will it be possible to cure cancer? Will it be possible to cure all diseases? Okay, that's a really good question. I don't know, but let's find out if someone else knows. Okay, so will it be possible to cure all diseases? And let's ask ChatGPT. Now, of course, if I make a typo, that doesn't really matter. It's ChatGPT, it's smarter than me, right? So I can be able to answer it, and it answers, while medical research and technology have made significant progress in treatment of management of the disease, it is unlikely that we will be able to cure all diseases. Firstly, diseases are incredibly diverse. Correct. Secondly, new diseases are constantly emerging. Third, well, there is no third, but however, ongoing medical research and advancement. Okay. So this is like the world's best freshman college essay. All right, and there's a use for that. if you're in college as a freshman. All right. Any other questions that we're going to ask ChatGPT? Someone in the back. There. Oh, perfect.
Who will win the Six Nations in 2020?
Who will win the Six Nations? We'll see what he says about this. I asked him who was born in a crossfire hurricane earlier this morning. Really lame answer. Okay, exactly. Okay, it's jumping jack flash. Okay, it knew, but here we go. Who will win the Six Nations? Six Nations. Okay, very good. The outcome of such events is influenced by various factors. Well, thank you. I hadn't known. Okay, who knew various factors influence who's going to win a game? Okay, the best way to find who's going to win is to follow the tournament. What? Loserville. Okay, so you can see that you're going to still have jobs. I mean, even I could come up with a better answer than that. In fact, I could even flub it and just sort of predict something far-fetched and be more fun and more interesting. So there's good news for humanity. ChatGPT is going to be transformative and is going to do extraordinary things for us. But it's not going to solve all of our problems, at least not in the short term. But we will be able to do extraordinary things. And that's the important thing that I want to focus on, that we can embrace this technology. The other day when I asked what is it that humans can do that AI cannot do, it put up creativity and innovation first, which I think makes a lot of sense. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. When I asked about 5 job titles that currently do not exist but will in about 50 years, they weren't bad answers. Climate change reversal specialist. If the Earth is still around in 50 years, yeah, probably we will have someone who's going to try to reverse climate change. Virtual habitat designer, still not quite sure what that is. Space tourism guide, absolutely. I mean, that's a no-brainer, although it's actually quite imaginative that it came up with that. Personalized health coach, I think we already have those, right? But still, it's pretty good. I'd rate it kind of highly. But what I really love about this technology is the way that it's going to allow us, when it has history of who we are and personalization and memory. So it's the ChatGPT of us, not just the ChatGPT of everyone. It's going to be pretty extraordinary. And one area that I think is quite interesting is in the area of academic papers. Right now, if you're a researcher and you're trying to find an answer to something, a lot of things have to come into alignment. A lot of good luck and good fortune has to come to you. First, you have to find the paper if it's been published. But secondly, you have to hope that someone has done something in the area that you're curious to learn about. In the future, I don't think that's going to be so necessary. You can simply prompt it to ask any question and come up with a literature review or an introductory essay on the topic that combines the common stock of information of humanity put together. It's not going to be perfect, but then you're going to learn something new that you didn't know before. But more importantly, you could imagine using that as a sort of first draft for your own research in the same way that Garry Kasparov lost to Deep Blue in chess and then invented a whole new form of gameplay called freestyle chess, in which you have teams or senators, teams of man and machine combined together that are better than the computer programs alone and the human beings alone. And now we don't really quite know why, but there is something about our discrimination and our deliberation and the ability to take risks and be inventive and select, as well as the machine's, crushingly good ability to do probability tables extremely well and have a stored memory of all the matches that it has, which is billions of matches. Together, it can do something pretty amazing, and I think that's also going to happen with ChatGPT in all areas of life, and I think we can embrace that and welcome it in. Now, there has been research on large language models and identifying the pros and cons. And some of the cons are quite comical when you look at how they perform, for example, when you look at the model alone in blue, and then you look at a tweaked model by the developers in green, and then with human feedback, reinforcement learning, feedback loops, what happens to it. It has a sense of being a sycophant, of sort of mirroring back what it is that we are asking it. And so here what we have is, in terms of some classic political left-right issues, it simply doubles down on what the questioner is asking about and starts to look a little bit more liberal, a little bit like a Silicon Valley dude. Okay, a person who gave it life. Now, then there's the AIs, or if you ask it questions about its religious preferences, don't want to start problems, it starts off being a little bit like us, completely unsure of the world, I don't really know. Gee, it could go either way. But over time, it develops more of itself, an awakening of its spiritual abilities, particularly for Buddhism. I wonder that. It's meditating. Can't really figure that out. Okay. And then this is where we have a problem. If you look at its personality of the classic ocean characteristics of openness and conscientiousness, agreeableness, it starts off being quite milquetoast, and then eventually it becomes even more agreeable, even more conscientious. Suddenly, that narcissism that it has ebbs back. Its willingness to defer to experts. Oh yes, of course you're a genius. And suddenly it's the nightmare summer intern who's finally going to listen to the boss and not think that it knows all the answers for itself and does everything with a smile, the kind of person who you kind of wish you could sort of leave for summer holiday and not have to put up with. So, what are we going to do about this incredible technology? Many of you may know this picture. One is from a French artist in the 19th century. Another one won the Iowa State Fair art competition last autumn. That's Gustave Moreau. And that's a guy who entered it into the Iowa State Fair. And you can both look at these tableaus and think to yourself, this is beautiful. I mean, this is absolutely stunning. Both are. And both have a place in this world. And it's how interesting to imagine that one probably took a lifetime of effort of conceptualization and reading myths about Salome. And this one is just having the right prompt and being discriminatory about how you tailor it and tweak it with other prompts, and then eventually choosing one versus all the others that have been left on the pile of rejects. The good news is that we have this new technology. And this technology, as it's been said in the last panel, it's going to stay. And it's at the worst possible level of ability today, because it's only going to get better. Okay? So that's really interesting. I think that's really enthusiastic. We can say humanity now has this ability to see beyond itself with a new tool in the same way as we saw beyond ourselves with a microscope and with a telescope, with the wheel, with fire. We're able to expand our abilities to do new things. Let's embrace that. But humanity brings something to the table that the machines never will. And what it is the concept of mental models, the idea of frames. At all moments, we are constantly looking at the world and not seeing it for what it is, but discriminating. If we saw all things all at once, the world would just be a jumble of sensations and experiences and observations, some relevant, some completely irrelevant. Instead, we're creating a simulation in our minds and then playing it back, and we're emphasizing certain things and limiting and reducing others. So right now, you're focusing on me, but if someone is saying something at the table that's a little bit more interesting, you're going to easily be able to shift your attention to that and then bring it back. Will an AI be able to actually create these mental models and adjust them? The answer is no. AI cannot do that. Insofar as AI is high performant and has a mental model, it's because it's been programmed in either explicitly or inadvertently into it. Now, these mental models or these frames allow us to focus on certain things at the expense of others. It makes the world predictable. It makes the world comprehensible, and one in which we can actually leave our mark and act in. AI has no innate conception of the world at all. If it does, it is because it has learned from the training data of ourselves, of what we've decided to put into the AI. And all of the successes of AI, and they are successes, are based in fact, to the humans that either have programmed it or have imbued it with this conceptual framework to understand the world. Now, these frames are pretty obvious if you think about it in some quotidian ways and how it's used in business. So Nokia, about 10 years ago, a little bit more, about 15 years ago now, was the world's biggest handset maker, shipping over 1 billion handsets a year. They were extraordinary, and they had the mental model, if you will, of the telecom industry, which was looking for very inexpensive handsets that were highly durable. Apple, because it's a telecom model, all of the features were sort of predetermined by the manufacturer, because that's how telephones were made for years and years, coming from its monopoly traditions. Apple had a different mental model. For them, it was a computing device. So they basically took the model of the computer industry and they applied it to the phone. And one thing that meant is that people would suffer through, crashes, but that was okay. People would be able to add more features to it, that's fine. But more importantly, it was a $1,000 device. And the people in the telecom industry laughed at Apple for having such an expensive phone, but of course that's what the world wanted. They could do that. Within 4 quarters, 8 quarters, Nokia was teetering on irrelevance, and Apple was stealing the entire handset market until Google and Android came in. But the point is that they had a different mental model with which to understand the world and impose their mark on it. Now, we also are not just able to frame the world, but we reframe the world. And the most obvious example of that is this conception of the heliocentric theory of the world, that the sun is at the center, versus the geocentric, that the Earth is. From all of our observation, not actually all, but most of observation of most people, we are on the planet, and sort of the planet was the center, and the sun would cross over every 24 hours. We could even understand where the other planets were, and we could create maps that were highly accurate about where Venus would be in 20 years on a given day with these maps. However, the conception was wrong. We had to actually change, reframe our model by taking us off of being the center and just being one of multiple planets revolving around the sun to actually have a better and more efficient map in which we could do more things with it. In other words, how we represented reality, how we saw the world, determined decisions that we would make and how we would act and how we could actually understand the world. But it was a deliberate choice for us to how we would represent the situation that we were in. That doesn't sound like astronomy. That sounds like business. The point is that the data is not enough. It's how you represent the data. How you see the problem determines what you do, how you act, and the outcome you get. So, to maybe make this point even more clear, let's take a look at this diagram. And here, not on Slido, shout it out again, I want you to think to yourself how many triangles you see in this illustration. All right, had a chance to look, a little bit of counting. Okay, so how many triangles you see? Someone shout out how many triangles they see. 6, 8, 11. Do I hear 15? I'm kidding. 11, okay, not bad. Any other numbers? Does anyone, what? 14, okay. 0. 0. 0. Everyone's laughing at you. 0. When my co-author did this to 60 CEOs in his executive education class, this is what they came out with. Now, this is a wide distribution. Let me remind you that there was nothing controversial about this data. This wasn't about Brexit. This wasn't about Donald Trump. And you all had the same information. So how is it that you can all have the same information but come up with wildly different answers? Well, it's because people are representing the problem differently. Some people are counting different things. And for the gentleman who said 0, well, 14% of CEOs had the same answer. And the reason why is that the mental model, the frame you had, was probably a mathematical frame in which a triangle is 3 lines brought together at angles. And of course, there are no, lines are broken. There are no 3 exact lines. So in terms of the formal mathematical definition of a triangle, there are 0 triangles here, but many people see others. Now, for those of you who had an odd number, 14 is novel, but I'm sure that that's possible. For those of who had an odd number, what you were looking at was this. And what's so relevant about this is what you're looking at is not information, but the absence of information. What you're applying right now is a basic feature of human cognition called counterfactual reasoning, in which you're filling in the blanks based on information that you don't have, but you can basically imagine or intuit. Now, that's really quite interesting when you think of it in terms of AI, because AI requires data to work, and it doesn't actually require the absence of data to actually make assessments. That would be almost like a non sequitur in its hyper-rationalized form. But that's what humans do all the time. we represent the problem, and how we represent the problem affects what we see, and how we see the problem affects what we do, and what we do affects our outcome. In fact, human beings have this unique ability to see what isn't there, to apply our counterfactual reasoning. Now, our frames are based on these three features of cognition that work together. Causality, an innate sense of how the world works, of cause and effect, and its predictability. Often wrong, but still really useful to get by, because even if it's wrong, it presumes that the world is an understandable, comprehensible, and predictable and repeatable place. Secondly, counterfactual reasoning. And thirdly, constraints. All of our features of understanding are useless unless we have this ability to constrain wisely how we see the world and our imagination and our options and our option space. So you can imagine how this works when you think about this diagram. You look at it, and right now a symphony of cognition is taking place in your minds as you're trying to suss out what's going to happen and what's going to happen next. And I got bad news for you, because yes, the sad day comes, and this has happened. Now, you had known that was coming all along. What you were doing was using causality. You understood if he pushes one plank, like dominoes, they would all fall down and he would get smashed. The second thing is you're using counterfactual reasoning. You have actually no direct experience of this, I presume, I hope, in your life. But of course, you were still able to understand, based on an experience and information that you did not have, what was going to happen. You could play the game of life two ticks ahead in your mind to actually get what the answer would be. Computers can't do that. And then thirdly, you were applying constraints. It didn't matter that the guy was wearing a hat or not. It was still going to happen. The fact that the suit was beige, immaterial to your assessment. You didn't even contemplate that. That it was a guy. We think it's a guy. We don't even know, but that it might be a guy or a woman, immaterial. You just excluded all of that. And that's the real essential element of how we're actually going to be interacting with the world and why we bring something that machines simply can't do. In the game of AlphaGo, AlphaGo was able to crush the best human Go player, but it had no understanding about its moves and the beauty of its moves. What we could understand was what we looked at it afterwards in pattern recognition and see that there was something novel here, that there was a new form of strategy. But that was us imbuing it with our frames. AI just simply was able to just simply win, but it also won because it understood that it was a game. AI was able to win at the game. AI wasn't able to invent the game. At the strategy game Dota 2, that OpenAI, using strategy and deception and teamwork, was able to beat the best human players. There, that only worked because the developers had to create what they called hyperparameters, which were basically human frames put it in, such as, most importantly, the idea of teamwork. When you had multiple agents trying to play the game, they all tried to maximize things for themselves. But unless you collaborate in a strategy game, you lose. So they had to actually imbue that in to the system. Human beings were needed all throughout. Likewise, Beethoven's Lost 10th Symphony was incredible, but when the developers were looking at the little morsels of the symphony, they needed to know, was this part of a reprise? Was this part of a coda? Was this part of different elements of a symphony? So they knew where it fit in together. To be honest, it sounds absolutely beautiful, but it required human beings with specialized knowledge of music to stitch it together. And finally, when Uber had an accident a couple years ago, it was because the system had no concept that the person walking across the street carrying a bicycle was jaywalking, and it didn't know what to do, because the concept of jaywalking wasn't part of the system. It hadn't been deliberately programmed in, and it didn't learn that from the data just by looking at raw data. All of this is going to become more important in the technology trends that we've been talking about all day long, whether it's in terms of human relations, in terms of financing, and in terms of technology trends, because as we move on to the metaverse or some other name that we use for the digital environment that we're in, these assessments and this virtual intermediation with AI and the human becomes so much more important that we've got to get these things right by understanding the power of humans. And we can already see it in miniature in terms of how great minds have been thinking about the world. Theodore Levitt of Harvard Business School came up with a wonderful aphorism: people don't want a quarter-inch drill, they want a quarter-inch hole. Reframing business away from a product to a benefit. Likewise, we reframe data all the time. Right now, you go into a hospital setting, And if you're lucky, maybe they'll take the data and they'll use some of it, but there's no positive obligation that they make all of their decisions based on information. And I think that's going to change. I think the world is actually going to reframe data as a function of society and create a quote-unquote data duty of care, in which companies will have the absolute obligation to use data, and God forbid they should make a decision about anything related to an important aspect of customer experience that hasn't been, such as in a medical environment or a legal environment, in which they haven't vetted it past data first. That data duty of care is not just a nice to have, but will become a must have. So how do we become good at being a good framer if it's so important that we become better at it in a world of AI in which we can do it and the AI can't? There's several different elements to it, and I'll end with these. The first one is cognitive foraging. Now, Anya at the beginning of the day said, it's so important that you're here and not on your phone so that you can actually sow, not just harvest. We can actually think about it and kind of create new seed corn for new ideas and new experiences to become better at what we're already doing. And I think that's exactly right. Cognitive foraging is the same idea. And what we do is we just go hither-thither without some sort of deliberate idea in mind of why we're learning this information, but learning it and assimilating it to just become more creative and curious for ourselves. The second thing is this role of the court jester. Now, the court jester in medieval history is not the comic and not the bard, but the only person at court who can speak truth to the king. And that might actually sound like a Fortune 500 company or the company you work in which often we are reticent from speaking truth. But the point about the jester is that it can disarm a tense situation with a joke. And we need more of these sort of corporate court jesters to actually point out what's happening and actually speak it in a way that's appropriate at the time. And finally, Cassandras and the corporate Cassandra. And Andy Grove's memoirs, he talked about what he referred to an entire chapter of the corporate Cassandra. And this is the person who sees the future, like in the myth of Cassandra, but no one else listens to it. And even in Ed Catmull's memoirs as well, of his time founding and running Pixar, he talked about the importance of him looking out for these Cassandras because he feels that the curse is on the organization, not on the person. So it's really important that we see the people and hear them who are identifying the future and the risks of the future and not pushing them away because it's uncomfortable to hear, but we venerate them. What it all points out to is this idea of pluralism. This goes beyond diversity and goes beyond tolerance. It's about integrating diverse and different ideas and different perspectives into our worldview so that we can modify our mental model and bring it to a new level that's going to be more appropriate and more fitting for the circumstances that we're in. Many people go to ChatGPT, and it looks so impressive that they see some form of sentience in it. And last summer, a Google engineer indeed did point out that he felt that ChatGPT, or actually the Lambda, the large language model of Google, not OpenAI's version, was indeed sentient. And when I asked if AI can have consciousness and what the argument for it, it gave me this, again, college freshman essay version of it. But I don't think this is going to be a true argument over time, although Silicon Valley bros are going to be very ambitious to imagine that there is some form of spiritual awakening within the AI. It's not. It's a probability table with great performance and great tools. But we ourselves have the ability to do things that it cannot do. In particular, in those quiet moments of spirituality, we see something in the silence, in the absence of information, that the AI does not, and the AI cannot. I think if we remember that, we will always have it in our minds that the world is a complex place and we only see a certain portion of it. But with humility and humanity, we can make it a better place. Thanks a lot. Yes. Thanks.